In a previous video, I took a look at DeepSeek R1, the new reasoning model from the Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek. Now, if you're interested in learning what it is, why it's important, and even how to get up and running with it by running it on your local machine, go ahead and check out that video. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. In this video, I want to talk about how to use this new R1 reasoning model in your Java and Spring applications. We'll get started by creating a simple Java application that talks to the REST API. We'll see how we can use this R1 reasoning model to start to build out some Java applications with it. I'll also leave you with a little bit of a refactor in the final code, which you can find below so that you can kind of reuse this in your applications. Now, from there, that's a really good start. But as we start to build out more intelligent applications, building generative AI applications, you'll really want to bring in a framework like Spring AI because it gives us a lot of advantages. One of those advantages is a unified API across AI providers. So there may be a situation where we want to use two different AI providers, say Google Gemini and DeepSeek, or OpenAI and Claude. And for that, with Spring AI, we can go ahead and write the same code, the same abstraction, and talk to these multiple AI providers. We also get structured output handling, observability and monitoring, the ability to call functions and tools, built-in RAG support, all of the things that you'll start to need when you start to build out some of these real-world applications. So we'll jump over to Spring. We'll build a Spring application that talks to the REST API, but we'll also go ahead and take this a little bit of a step further. In that previous video, I showed you how to download one of these DeepSeek R1 models onto your local machine and run it using something like Olama. So in our Spring application, we'll talk to the publicly available API, but we'll also see how to talk to the one that's running on our local machine. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun building DeepSeek into our Java and Spring applications. With that, what are we waiting for? Let's write some code. All right, I'm getting started by using IntelliJ IDEA. You can use whatever IDE or text editor you want. It should be pretty much the same here. So I'm going to fill out my new project here. I'm going to call this DeepSeek. So DeepSeek. I'm going to put this in Java DeepSeek. I'm going to use Maven. We're not going to bring in any external dependencies, but you always want to start with the build tool because at some point you're going to need some external dependencies. So you can use Maven or Gradle. I'm going to use JDK23. We'll say dev.dan-vega, and I will have a DS folder. Actually, we'll call this DeepSeek. And I think that will be enough. So I'm going to go ahead and click create, and I'll go ahead and move myself out of the way so we can go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing that we'll need to do is let's open up main now. IntelliJ adds some of this in for if we are building out a new application. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and get rid of that, and we are ready to go. Okay, so first, a couple things that we're going to need. So private static final string, we're going to need an API key. So this is something you'll have to get from DeepSeek. If you head over to deepseek.com and go to the API platform, this is where I got my API key. Now, at the time of this recording, this has not been working. So hopefully by the time you're watching this, this is working. But once you have an API key, you can go ahead and put it in here. Now, I'm not going to hard code my API key here so that you can see it. I'm going to go ahead and use an environment variable. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that from my environment. But if you're just getting started, you can go ahead and hard code it in there. Just make sure you don't go ahead and check that into Git. So the next thing I need is a base URL. So I'll say base URL is equal to, and this is going to be api.deepseek.com/v1. That's going to be the base for our API. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to construct a body, like a request body that we're going to send off to the API. So I'm going to create a string here called body. And in this body, we will kind of have some JSON that we are going to set. Now I'm going to paste this in here just so we don't have to watch me type this out. But again, this is just some JSON. So we are going to have the model. So the model is There are different models that you can talk to based on whatever API or AI provider you're talking to. In this case, there's a DeepSeek Chat, which is really their version 3. And then there's DeepSeek Reasoner, which is the new R1 model that we want to talk to. Next, we're going to set up some messages. So we need to set up a role. What is the role? The role is the user. So there are different roles when we're talking to these AI systems, like system and role and function. This role of user is really the user message that we're sending off to the LLM. In this case, I'm going to use this strangely complicated question that large language models have trouble answering sometimes, but it really kind of highlights the reasoning model behind it, being able to answer this question. How many R's are in the word strawberry? So this is our request. And once we have our request, we need to kind of set that up. So I'm going to create a new request. We're going to use the HTTP request in JDK. And we'll just say that we need a new, new builder. And from there, we can go ahead and set some attributes on this. So the first I need to do is set the URI. So I'm going to say URI.create. And this is going to use the base model and then this URI. So the full API URL is /chat/completions. And if this looks familiar, it is because DeepSeek doesn't have their own API. It uses the OpenAI API. We're going to set a header, and this header is going to be content type. So content type, and the value for content type is going to be application/JSON. We'll set another header here that will be for the authorization, and the authorization is going to use a bearer token. So we're going to say bearer and a space, and then our API key. So that should get us what we need to be authorized. We are going to post the request. So we're going to say HTTP request dot body of publishers dot of string. And the string that we're passing in is that body that we created before. So once we get that, we can go ahead and build that, and that is going to return our request. All right, so we're getting there. We need a client. So I'm going to say client is equal to HTTP client. Again, this is the HTTP client built into the JDK. So we'll say new HTTP client. Once we have that, we can go ahead and send it off and we'll get a response back. And so we'll say client.send. And what are we going to send off? We are going to send off that request we just created. And we're going to use the HTTP response dot body handlers dot of string. And this is just kind of defining what the response is going to be. The response is going to be a string. And I'm going to get the response body out. So the response returns a bunch of things like the status and headers and things like that. I just want the body, the actual response. So I'm going to set that into a variable called response body. And so we'll say response dot body, and that will give us the body. We'll need to go ahead and add an exception there. And yeah, we're looking good. So with that, I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to go ahead and print this out to the console. I'll say response body, and we should have everything we need. So if we've done everything correctly, we should be able to go ahead and run this application. And it's going to talk to the URI with undefined scheme. So let's see, what did we do here? Oh, we need our base URL. That might help. So let's try that again. Now this might take a second. The public API for DeepSeek, again, it is a reasoning model, so it may take some time to like not only get the question, but think about the answer and then produce the answer. So we're just going to wait for this second. As we get into the Spring example today, running on our local machine, you see it's much, much faster. All right, and then we see the response. So there's an ID in there. There's all of the data that comes back from the API. And then you see the word, the content is really the response that we're looking for. You see the word strawberry is spelled this, breaking it down. We kind of see like its thought process. And all the way back here, you should see, yeah, so therefore the answer is 3. And the response gives us other things like tokens. So what it took to create this request and response, the prompt tokens are what we sent. The completion tokens are kind of the output, and then the total of number of tokens that it takes. So that is a response. Now, one way we can kind of clean this up, I'm going to bring in a dependency. And that dependency is going to be Jackson. Maybe we want to format this out a little bit better. Again, Jackson does a whole lot more, but one thing that we can do with Jackson is kind of format that response a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a dependency on Jackson data bind. Again, Jackson does so much more, and we'll see some of that when we get into kind of the Spring side of things. But with that, now what I can do is I can basically say, if the response body is not empty, let's go ahead and do something with that. So I'm going to use the object mapper. So the object, let's go back here. Did I not pull this in? Let's make sure that we refresh our dependencies here. All right, object mapper. We'll call this the mapper, and this is equal to new object mapper. And so with the object mapper, we can do something. We can say mapper.read value. So let's read the value of the response body, and we'll map that to just an object.class. And from there, we can get our JSON. So now that we have our JSON, we can say mapper.writer with default pretty printer. And this is just going to give us some pretty JSON. So we'll call it that. And now what we can do is go ahead and print out that pretty JSON. So just a little tip I thought I'd share with you if you want to get some pretty JSON so that you can see that in the console instead of that one line that we were seeing before. Whoops, I forgot to do something here. Let's go ahead and write value as string and then the JSON, right? That would give us a string, and that should do it. All right, so that finished, and you can see we get some nice pretty JSON here. We can see everything that's kind of included in that response. We have the model. We have our choices. This is the role. So we see that the word strawberry is spelled, it breaks it down. And then there's some reasoning context. This is the reasoning part of the model. It's kind of trying to figure out, like, based on the prompt, what are you asking to the LLM? It's going to go through and try to reason out and think through its process before it goes and answers it. And then you see through the usage, we get our tokens, token detail, whether or not it was hit from a cache, and so on. So that was just an example of how to do this in a Java project. I'm going to leave you with this in the final code. I'm going to paste some code in here. This was nice to just kind of show an example of it, but not very reusable. So I put together a little bit more of a reusable app here, if you will, starting with the DeepSeek model. So there's some records in here to store config, what a message looks like, a request, a response, choice, and usages. So once we do that, we can create a DeepSeek client. And from there, we have the ability to chat. So it will take the request. Here's the user role, the message that we're going to send. It will kind of abstract the request here that we're going to send off. We'll get a response, and then it will use that object mapper to kind of read it. So there's also an exception here if something happens. And the way that you can use this in an application now is by getting your API key, creating a new client, and then sending chats to that client. Now, again, you can do this multiple times in your application instead of just doing it once in that single application. But either way, this is a Java application talking to the DeepSeek REST API using the OpenAI API. All right, so now we're going to start on the Spring side of things. And to get started, we'll use a Spring AI. And Spring AI aims to streamline the development of applications that incorporate artificial intelligence functionality without unnecessary complexity. So I'll leave the docs below. The docs are really good, a great place to get started with Spring AI. Go ahead and check it out. You can see all of the different features that it supports. One of the things that Spring AI is really good at is if you go into kind of this chat client API and then take a look at the AI models, and then if you're just interested in chat, look at all the different AI models that we support in Spring AI. And again, it's using this unified abstraction. So you can write the same code that talks to Anthropic, that talks to Grok, that talks to a llama, etc. So I'll leave the link for this. But to get started, we're going to head over to start.spring.io. We're going to fill in some metadata here, dev.dan-vega. We are going to call this, let's just say DS for DeepSeek. And we're going to use a couple things. So we're going to build a web app. And then we just need to choose the AI provider. In this case, we're going to use OpenAI's API, and we'll talk to the DeepSeek R1 model using that. So that's all we need to get started. Now we'll bring in a llama support when we want to talk to the local running model, but for now, this is a good start. So all you want to do is click generate. That will download a zip file. You can open this up in whatever text editor ID you're most productive in. For me, that's going to be IntelliJ. And with that, let's write some code. All right, so I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to rename this. Let's say application. We'll refactor the test for that. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and set some properties. So no matter what LLM provider we're talking to or model, we need to set a couple of properties. In this case, we're going to be talking to the OpenAI API. And so I'll set a couple of things there. So first, we'll go ahead and say AI.OpenAI, and we're going to talk to the, we need the API key. So again, I'm not just going to hard code this in there, but this is your DeepSeek API key. So I'm going to say DeepSeek API key, and I have this as an environment variable, so it will pull it in from there. Next, I want to set an API base. So I'm going to say OpenAI base URL. And this is going to be that same URL that we used in the Java project. So we'll say deepseek.com. Now, the default model that we would talk to is going to be the version 3. So if we don't do anything, we're going to talk to DeepSeek's v3. So we want to come in and say Spring AI, OpenAI chat options model. So by default, this is going to look like this, but we want to change that to use that R1, that reasoning model. So we'll say reasoner, and that will give us that particular model. So with that, we have everything we need to talk to DeepSeek's R1. So I'm going to go ahead and just come in here to application, and we'll create a simple command line that will just go ahead and ask the LLM a question and output the response. So to do this, I'm going to use a command line runner. So, I need a bean first, and I'll say command line runner, and we'll get a chat client by getting the auto-configured builder. So we'll say builder, and then this is going to return args, yes. And inside of here, we can go ahead and create a client. We'll say client is equal to builder.build. All right, so now we have a client that we can use in our application to talk to the LM. So all we need to do is go ahead and use that client. So I'm going to say client.prompt. I'm going to pass in a user message. So how many R's are in strawberry, right? And then all we're going to do is make a blocking call to that application. We'll go ahead and get the content, which is really just the answer, the response that we're looking for. And I'll get that. I will call that response. And from there, I can go ahead and output this to the console. So I'll go ahead and say response, and that should work. All right, and that response took a little time. In all my testing, I found that the API has been a lot slower than something like OpenAI's GPT-4o, but nonetheless, we got an answer here. So the word strawberry is spelled this, breaking it down. There are 3 instances of the letter R. So great, that worked. Now what I want to do is kind of abstract this out into its own class. We're going to create kind of a REST controller here. Let's call this the DeepSeek controller. And this is going to be a REST controller. And I need an instance of that chat client. Now I'm kind of abstracting this out because we are going to use kind of 2 chat clients here, one for DeepSeek's like REST API and one for a llama for the model running locally on my machine. So I'll go ahead and say chat client. This is going to look pretty similar. We're going to say builder. Oops. And then this is going to be builder.build, and that will give us a chat client. And then really, I'm just kind of abstracting this out. So let's copy that or extract that, and we'll have a get mapping for DeepSeek, public string DeepSeek, and this is going to return whatever that call is. So cool. So that'll give us that. I just want to show you kind of the other side of this. Let's say we have a DeepSeek stream. Because you saw that that reasoning took a little while and the response took a little while to get back. So we also have the ability in Spring AI to return a stream. So we could say we're going to return a flux of strings. We'll call this DeepSeek stream. And then we're going to do something similar to this, except instead of making that blocking call, we're just going to use the stream method, and that gives us that that streaming ability to get it back as those chunks are available. So I'm going to go ahead and rerun this application. Yeah, we need to get rid of this because we're not using that anymore. Let's go ahead and run this again. And I will go ahead and use a client on the command line called HTTP. So HTTP, it just allows me to make calls using the command line here, a simple interface, something like curl, but much more readable for me. But I'm going to make a call to 8080/DeepSeek stream. And again, we are using the stream method here to kind of get the response as it comes in. So this is going to be, again, not much faster, but as the response starts to comes back, you'll see that it starts getting printed to the console here, as opposed to a blocking call that is going to wait for the entire response to come back and print it to the console. So we still get the same answer there, and we have that. Now, what I want to do is kind of incorporate the ability to talk to the large language model, the DeepSeek R1 that is running on my local machine. All right, so if you were with us in the last video, we installed Ollama. And if you go ahead and look at Ollama list, we've installed one of the R1 models. So there's like a 1.5, a 7, an 8 billion parameter, all the way up to like 650 billion parameters or something. So I installed a pretty small model, but it's great for kind of testing things out and giving it a quick try. So I can run this locally. I can say Ollama run DeepSeek R1 7 billion. And now from there, I can go ahead and start asking it questions. But I don't want to do that. I want to ask it questions via my Spring application. And so to do so, you could go back over to the Spring initializer, and you can figure out, like, if you pick the Ollama starter from the initializer, it'll give you the right dependencies. I actually have that dependency here, so I'm going to drop it in here. And now we have Ollama support. Now the thing to think about, and I've done this in a separate video, is that once you bring in a second LLM, there are some things that we need to consider. We don't want that auto configuration to kick in and create a chat client builder instance for us, because we don't know which one it's supposed to be used for, right? When there's only one LLM on the class path, or in one of the starters are on the class path, then it makes sense. We know which one to pick. But in this case, we don't. So I want to say chat client enabled equals false. I don't want you to create a chat client for me. I'm going to create them for myself because I actually have two different ones that I need to create. So the way that we'll do this is we'll come in here and we'll create a bean. And the first one that we're going to create is for that chat client that we already have, which is the OpenAI chat client. And the way that we do that is by using the OpenAI chat model. So we'll say chat model, and all we're going to do is return chat client.create, and this takes in a model, and so we'll pass in our chat model. So we're going to do something similar for Ollama. So we can just kind of paste this, and we'll say the Ollama chat client, and this is going to take in the Ollama chat. Ollama chat model. Did we not? Let's just see here. Okay, we got to refresh our project maybe. Okay, that seems to be okay now. Check client.create, and now we have a second one. So what we have to do in our DeepSeek controller is we have this chat client. We no longer have a builder that is auto-configured for us. So what we can say is we need a chat client. And this chat client, there's actually going to be two of them. So we need to find a way to say, hey, which one do you care about? In this case, I want the OpenAI chat client. And then to do that, we can just say this.chat client equals chat client, and this is going to work the same. So now that I have that, I'm going to create a new controller. I'm going to call this the Ollama chat controller. And this is going to look pretty similar, right? We're going to create a REST controller. We are going to say private final chat client. And then in the constructor, we are basically going to give it a qualifier. So we're going to say @qualifier. And in this case, it's going to be the Ollama chat client. And then that equals the chat client. So now what we can do is kind of write some code to talk to that local model that's running our machine that we just started. So let's say get mapping /Ollama public. Let's use a stream again. So public flux string, we'll call this Ollama. And then what we are going to return from this is the chat client. We're going to prompt it. We are going to pass it a string. And let's do something different here. Yeah, let's say, can you give an example of a LEET style coding problem and answer it in Java? That sounds fun. So we'll go ahead and stream this, and then we'll get the response. And that is all we need. So this should work. And then I think one thing that we're going to see from this is that this is going to be much faster because we're not calling out to the public DeepSeek API. We are calling the API that is running right on our machine. So again, I'm going to say HTTP. We need this -- stream to say that we are streaming the response. And then I'll say Ollama. So Ollama, what did we do here? Let's look at this. And okay, so we forgot to set something up. We set up our OpenAI API stuff. Now we need to go ahead and set something for Ollama as well. And we need to be very clear on what chat model we're going to talk to. So Spring AI Ollama chat model is equal to this DeepSeek. Now this is going to be a little different because this is the model on the public side. This is the model basically whatever model we installed on our local machine. And in this case, it's that 7 billion parameter one. So let's try that. Let's try rerunning that and see if we can get to there. Okay. And let's go down here. Let's try that again. And you see it start to think, and now we get that. Again, this is really fast because it's running on our local machine. So if you're doing something, proof of concept, or even using it for your own purpose, this is a really great way to take advantage of some of these models by running them locally on your machine and using them in your application. So you can see it's going through, it's thinking, and then it will go through and kind of answer this problem in Java. So this is, again, just a great use case for using it on your local machine. Now I have a MacBook M4. It's a pretty beefy machine, but again, this is one of those smaller models. You can try and run whatever small model you have. You could even get crazy with this. NVIDIA has this digits computer coming out that you can run like 200 billion parameter models on. I know you can daisy chain some like Mac minis together to do this if you want to set up your own little kind of home lab. The possibilities are endless. So pretty cool stuff here. We were able to, in Spring, set up a connection to DeepSeek's public API, as well as talking to a model that we downloaded on our own machine. And yeah, I think had a lot of fun with it. So all the code for both the Java and the Spring examples will be in the description below. All right, there you have it. That is incorporating DeepSeek into your Java and Spring applications. Again, if you haven't had a chance to watch the DeepSeek introduction video, I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Check out kind of why it's important, downloading it, running on your local machine. But DeepSeek has really kind of taken over the internet the last week or so. So I thought it would be important to kind of take a look at this. And hats off to the Spring team for getting support for that into Spring AI right away. That was really cool to see. So let me know in the comments. Are you going to use DeepSeek? Are you using DeepSeek R1? It's got a lot of really good advantages. Again, I think the cost to train the model was, at least from all the reports we're seeing out there, was significantly less than some of the large language models out there, which is being passed on to you as the consumer. The pricing for being able to use this in your applications is significantly lower than some of the other models out there. So let me know. Are you going to take advantage of this? Are you going to use this in your Java and Spring applications? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I hope you learned something new today. I had a lot of fun putting these videos together, so I hope you got something out of them. If you did, friends, do me a big favor. Leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding.